Are storms getting stronger? Are floods getting higher? And is the notion of Tornado Alley shifting?
Yeah, I'm just really thankful that we survived.
This is a StormTrack8 special report, how our weather has changed.
How our weather has changed, a StormTrack8 special, sponsored by Tyson Foods.
Good evening, I'm StormTrack8 Chief Meteorologist James Zahara. Understanding weather is important in the Midwest. It's our passion here to not just bring you the day's highs and lows, but to you learn more about the conditions around you. That's why our team is here to do just that tonight with this StormTrack8 special report, how our weather has changed. Tonight, the whole StormTrack8 team is right here, and we are going to explore 4 things. Tornadoes on the move, why the area we think of as Tornado Alley isn't living up to its name, and how its shift is putting a target on some more populated areas. And storm severity, how a few degrees in warming can set up more dangerous storms. And the examples we've seen right here in the Quad Cities. Plus, farmers on the front lines, how our changing climate is leading to a change in strategy for the people who feed and supply families around the world. And our rising river. We've seen the power of the swollen, mighty Mississippi. Are we doing enough to plan ahead for the next record crest? In fact, let's go ahead and start right there. With frequent historic river flooding, it's considered by many scientists to be the biggest clue our climate is changing right here in our area. Each year, people who live and work along these major rivers don't just ask if the river is going to flood, but when and how high. It's life along the Mississippi River.
We just have to be prepared for whatever comes our way.
And along this mighty river is an increased chance for flooding and a growing need to plan ahead.
If we put either new buildings, sidewalks, anything else down there, we have to make sure that it is flood-proof, so to speak.
In 2019, the Mississippi climbed more than 6 feet higher than Buffalo's flood stage.
I lifted everything up yesterday just as a precaution because I didn't know. I really honestly didn't think this was going to happen.
With water seeping up from sewers and through breaches in the quickly built sandbag walls.
Well, James, much of the impact of what we're seeing on the rivers here locally is a result of climate change.
I talked with National Weather Service meteorologist Rich Kinney, who said it's no coincidence we're seeing floods occur more often, last longer, and rise higher than in the past.
Yes, this is the new normal, really. And in terms of looking off into the future, we're likely to see these trends continuing at least through the end of this century.
The flood of 1965 was historic. Then came the unbelievable flooding in 1993. But it's unbelievable no more. 4 of the last 7 record crests along the Mississippi River in the Quad Cities have occurred since 2000. And 8 of the last 10 record crests on the Rock River has taken place over the last 20 years. Ray, what has been the consensus from your colleagues and science experts about, with the warming that's taking place?
It really shows we're in kind of a precarious position that, if addressed now, might save us money and heartache down the line.
I talked with Ray Wolf, the National Weather Service's Science and Operations Officer. It seems like the past 2.5 years or so, science has been challenged.
We've seen clearly in our observational data set, both locally and around the world, that it's happening. And you can see it through measured temperatures and measured rainfall.
A warmer world holds more moisture. It is what we like to call a supercharged water cycle. For every 1 degree of warming, the saturation levels are increased actually by 4%. For us, that can mean heavier snow and rain events and an increase in flooding. Since 1958, we in the Midwest have seen 42% increase in heavy rain and downpours. And since 1950, Iowa has seen up to 8 extra inches of precipitation a year. Illinois is up to 6 inches more. You mentioned to me on the phone, back in 1990, the water was actually above our heads right here.
Yeah, absolutely. We're along Parkway and Greenway Drive.
This is what it looked like as Bettendorf residents dealt with flash flooding along Duck Creek. Today, the city is dealing with the problem through better land management.
Since the 2000 disaster mitigation bill came out by the federal government, that requires us cities and counties to work together to create a hazard mitigation plan, all hazard mitigation plans, so floods is just part of it.
In this neighborhood south of Spruce Hills Drive, the city is in the process of buying properties which are within the 100-year floodplain. More than 20 homes have been torn down. Another 6 could be razed soon due to the dangerous flash flooding caused by downpours.
If you have something like clogged storm systems or things like that, where you have a short amount of rain in a very small locality that happens very quickly and overwhelms the systems that are in place either naturally or through the infrastructure.
So cities like Bettendorf must factor climate change in its plans far from the Mississippi River.
If we can make our infrastructure more resilient, is that by perhaps locating it in an area that's not in a hazard, such as a flood, or actually just making it stronger, more flood-proof, if that's the possibility. Another important thing is education. Meetings like this, where we educate the population that while we are the first responders, often in case you are your own first responders.
And back in Buffalo, first responders have a new tool they can use.
So this machine right here, all we have to do is have a couple gentlemen preload the bags onto this fixture.
Future flood fighting will now depend on a new sandbagging machine and other equipment that helps the city hold back the waves.
So that way, not just our community, but other surrounding areas, if they need something like this or need this piece of equipment, that we will be able to share that with the other communities.
Because a warming planet's impact on our neighborhoods near and even not so near to rivers is not going away anytime soon.
Folks really need to factor climate change into their long-range planning. Mitigation efforts to adapt to the situation.
Frequent river flooding is only one aspect. If you don't live and work along the river, that might not impact you. There's one job that can never change, and as meteorologist Morgan Strackbine shows us, there's work as part of the heart of our region.
The weather influences our plans, what we wear, how we drive, but not all of us have a job that is influenced by the weather. Farmers are some of the most dependent and knowledgeable observers of the changing atmospheric conditions.
It used to be a lot more livestock intensive.
Phil Ford is a sixth-generation farmer in Taylor Ridge with nearly 30 years of experience.
We have these extremes. We have lack of moisture or way too much moisture in short periods of time. And I guess that's what we've seen a lot in the last 10 years, is more extremes than ever.
Right now, the way the weather is and that, I think we'll probably have an early spring.
About 20 miles south in New Windsor is Jeff Kerwin's family farm.
And that ground is powder dry, 4 feet down.
Jeff is a third-generation farmer with 30 years of experience and a shared opinion of those extremes.
I remember growing up, it was a big deal when we had a tornado go through and roll a combine up in a little ball. But I don't remember these severe rain events that we've seen, as of late.
A major obstacle was the spring of 2019 when the area received nearly 20 inches of rain.
That rain event of 19, the whole wet spring, and the complications that it brought to farmers. We had a lot of farmers in the area that didn't plant a crop that year, and almost 100% didn't plant a crop.
It just seems like that 100-year flood has came half a dozen times in the last 10 years.
Being resilient and ready to adapt have become essential strengths for farmers in the past 10 years. Year-round strategies like using cover crop have become routine.
If we're always growing something on our land 365 days a year, it's less prone to some of these other events.
Then there are other extremes that hurt a growing crop.
These short-term thunderstorms that bring incredible winds and incredible energy and multiple times in a growing season.
Stronger storms mean stronger winds, winds that their crop cannot withstand.
The last 4 or 5 years we've seen these strong wind events, and the derecho a few years ago.
The August 2020 derecho will be a day we all remember, but it was not an isolated event out here in these fields.
Even this past year, in this area, we saw more wind events that blew corn down than we did the year of the derecho.
And you notice there's certain fields and certain hybrids that could take the 60-mile-an-hour wind, but the 90-mile-an-hour wind, it just didn't matter. It just leveled the whole field.
This makes harvesting a bigger task and takes more money out of their pockets.
It's very expensive, costly, because it wears our equipment out because we're running so much dirt through the machine to try and pick up what little bit of crop is left on the ground.
Crop insurance is just one tool to provide that extra support in case of a damaging wind event.
And a lot of farmers, including myself, have taken wind policies specifically on corn that pays you if you have these horrible wind events.
There will never be a perfect season for agriculture. Farmers know they need to adapt, mitigate, and learn along with the changing extremes.
You can't change the weather, but you try to study it, you try to watch it, you try to understand it.
And there's nothing we can do about it in agriculture. We just, do the best that we can and deal with it.
Yeah, farmers definitely get curveballs thrown at them every year, whether it comes to flooding or those wind events that you just talked about. Exporting their crop, that's got to be taking a hard hit too, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, they have a lot of their soybeans and their corn get transported down the Mississippi River. And Phil even talked about how that the river, it's been so high, it has to shut down all that barge traffic. And then that just means all their transportations get to a halt. And already they have to combat the season that it's already closed. So that's just adding extra time for that transportation process.
All right, Morgan Strappang, thank you very much on that. Still ahead on Weather Has Changed, a recipe for severity, how the elements of climate change can create a weather pressure cooker leading to more dangerous storms. But first, see if you can answer this trivia question. We all hope we all are just pretty much done with it, but what's the latest snowfall on record in the Quad Cities? Was it April 30th, May 3rd, or June 18th? The answer when we come back. We left you with this question. When was the latest snowfall on record in the Quad Cities? Was it April, May, or June? It was actually B, May 3rd. That was back in 1935. The latest snowfall on record was less than an inch, 0.3 to be exact, reported at the airport over in Moline. Welcome back, everyone. Severe weather season in the Midwest can bring dangerous weather that can develop very quickly. And as StormTrack8 meteorologist Efridge Davis explains, a changing climate means better potential for those storms to be even more powerful.
In 2020, hurricane-force winds whipped through the heart of the Midwest.
Wow. There's a power out. There we go. There's a transformer that just went.
A powerful derecho blew through parts of Iowa and Illinois, knocking out power, trees, crops, and even buildings.
This mangled metal you see behind me is all that's left of a grain bin similar to the size of the one still standing.
It's still one of the worst storms in Iowa's history. but it might not be the last.
What we can do for severe weather is look at the environments that promote severe weather.
Ray Wolf is a science and operations officer with the National Weather Service. When storms develop, he watches for two things:
The CAPE, the amount of energy in the atmosphere that helps produce thunderstorms, and the wind shear, how the wind changes speed and direction with height.
Scientists out of Purdue found a warming of the Earth's atmosphere increases CAPE, that energy buildup, while decreasing wind shear. That combination, ultimately, will create more storms. That rise in energy is expected to create a rise in thunderstorms, including here in the Quad Cities. With more thunderstorms comes another dangerous phenomenon.
And so we opened up the door and found out that most of our house was gone.
In central Iowa, cleanup is still ongoing from a deadly tornado in Winterset. But while we've seen a rise in tornadoes, it's hard to pinpoint exactly why.
A lot of that has to do with more people out looking for them and social media and cell phone cameras. So it's hard to tell whether that's a real trend in an increase in tornadoes or just an increase in the observations.
However, we do know the thunderstorms that tornadoes pop out of are ramping up. Today, scientists are seeing more frequent clusters of tornadoes, as well as more breakout days, where 30 or more funnels drop in a day. And as cities expand, there's more for those tornadoes to hit.
Elmore and 53rd, which is a pretty busy shopping district. Lots of folks out there on any given day. But you go back 25 or 30 years and those were farm fields and, and gravel roads.
And believe it or not, more heat could actually mean more snow. More warmth means more evaporation, putting more moisture into the atmosphere.
The season that we have snow on the ground on average is shrinking at both ends. It's starting later and ending earlier. But with a wetter atmosphere, if we're cold enough, we are seeing snowstorms producing more snow, especially in the upper Midwest.
According to the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Agency, the U.S. has seen twice as many extreme snowstorms since the first half of the 20th century.
When we talk climate change, we're talking trend over a fairly lengthy period of time, like 10, 20, 50 years, to the end of the century.
When it comes to predicting future intensity and severity of storms, we have to look at the ingredients that creates them.
The big thing is we're seeing impacts from a changing climate already,
making these once-in-a-lifetime storms more of the norm. And it's important to remember that those storms can happen year-round.
Well, a great example was just a recent event back in December.
Yes, we did have a derecho come through the Quad Cities when it had gusts of up to 90 miles per hour.
All right, Everett Davis, thank you very much. Thank you very much. Still ahead on our weather has changed. Tornado Alley, a long accepted concept of where tornadoes are most likely to form, what the evidence shows us about how even the location of severe storms might be changing. But how about another trivia question? What state has had the most F5 and EF5 tornadoes per square mile? Is it Oklahoma, Kansas, or Iowa? Okay, we left you with this question. Which state has had the most F5 and EF5 tornadoes per square mile? Your choices were Oklahoma, Kansas, or Iowa. And the answer is Iowa. Since record keeping began in 1950, there have been only 59 tornadoes that strong recorded in all of the U.S. Welcome back, everyone. A severe weather outbreak can destroy miles of homes and businesses in a matter of minutes. And as meteorologist Andrew Stusky tells us, there are new places more likely to get the worst of it, and there are less rural than you think.
Drive somewhere around 10 to 15,000 miles a year across the Great Plains, including Iowa.
Dr. Victor Gensini, an associate professor of meteorology at Northern Illinois University, is on the hunt.
One of the things we really noticed over the last 5 to 10 years is the number of those events, finding them was getting harder.
He's talking about finding supercell thunderstorms, the type of storm that produces this.
Holy crap, guys. This thing is huge.
We know right now that when you look over the entire United States, if you were to look at a time series of tornadoes, those numbers are relatively constant. But what our study showed now 4 years ago is that, depending on where you are, that line may not be steady. It may be increasing or decreasing.
A study conducted back in 2018 by Gensini and his colleagues found that weather patterns are changing and tornadoes are on the move. It's a big deal because not only is the frequency of tornadoes increasing right here in the Quad Cities, but it's also increasing in much larger cities like Memphis, Tennessee.
If you move and change the tornado risk in any location, especially further to the east in the United States where we have a lot more people living, that's of course a big deal for human impact.
This is the part of the country that we typically refer to as Tornado Alley, stretching from Iowa through the Central Plains. However, Dr. Gensini's study found that this is not an accurate representation of Tornado Alley at all. In fact, it actually spreads much further east, encompassing parts of the Tennessee Valley. Where you're seeing green on this map is where the number of tornadoes is increasing. Meanwhile, the brown areas show where tornado activity is actually decreasing. So why is it that we're seeing fewer tornadoes in this area?
The sort of general trend in that area of the United States is for hotter summers and less humidity. And that when you get that high heat, you think, well, there's going to be thunderstorms today. Well, it depends on whether or not you have that critical humidity, that critical moisture component. You really have a lot more targets across the landscape in the east, and that's what really causes the increased fatalities in those regions. And of course, as you kind of migrate your way from Iowa to, say, Chicago or Indianapolis or even further east, the population density gets greater, and we basically have more targets on the dartboard for these severe storms to hit.
Gensini says some of the climate modeling data may even be a bit behind the curve compared to what is happening right now.
The interesting thing is a lot of those models actually don't project that getting really significant until after 2050. So what we're seeing perhaps already is maybe the models are a little bit behind. I'm not sure if that's a fingerprint of climate change or if that's some sort of natural cycle that will come and go, but it is a big deal.
While the trends may stick out, there's still more work to be done.
We're in the process of doing a lot of these types of modeling and forecasting research studies that will help us try to fill in those gaps. But it is something that we kind of have to watch every year.
So Andrew, it's been 4 years since the study came out, and let me ask you this. Does Dr. Gensini have any plans to do any other study that's, let's say, even similar?
Absolutely, yeah. He's actually gearing up right now to start studying hail. Now that we've got tornadoes out of the way, hail can also be damaging to automobiles, roofs of homes. So he's going to study where the biggest hail falls and where the hail frequency is greatest. And I'm sure once he gets that study done, a lot of insurance companies are going to be knocking at his doorstep.
Yeah, looking forward to that. Andrew Stusky, thank you very much on that. Folks, still ahead on how our weather has changed. Evidence of climate change can be big, like an EF5 tornado, and it can be as small as a tick. What this bug is teaching us about how our weather has changed. Welcome back to this StormTrack8 special, How Our Weather Has Changed. We've talked about the impact climate change is having on all of us, but we haven't mentioned that animals share our land and water. The surface temperature of the upper Great Lakes, including Lake Michigan, are rising faster than the land temperature. And the Great Lakes have seen a 71% decrease in ice cover since 1973. That's impacting fish and other creatures in the water. And on land, something as small as a tick is infected. These ticks are what's called Lone Star ticks and are among the insects that were once confined to warm, dry areas like Texas. Here's a map of where you can find them now. They're spread throughout the east and, yes, are now found as far north as Iowa and Illinois.
So there are things, both physical and biological in nature, changes that we're seeing. Like the growing season for farmers is getting longer by a couple of weeks. So we're experiencing those, and it's hard to look in the future and see those things continue, perhaps even likely to get worse, and not want to plan or prepare for them.
The information we gather every day is to help you plan and prepare. Climate is complex, but you've learned a lot tonight. Andrew Stutsky showed us how tornadoes are on the move and why the area we think of as Tornado Alley isn't living up to its name. And when it comes to storm severity, Efford Davis told us how a few degrees in warming is setting up more dangerous storms in the Quad Cities. Plus, Morgan Strackbein showed us how farmers on the front lines are changing strategies. And of course, we explained about how cities are responding to the threat of our rising river. You can count on our team to keep you posted on the day-to-day and year-to-year changes in the forecast with our StormTrack8 weather app. It's a free download right to your phone. I'm Chief Meteorologist James Zahara. Thank you so much for watching our StormTrack8 special report, How Our Weather Has Changed. fizzled away. I'm just really surprised about
Just
that.
kind of fizzled.
It's funny when you wear these Apple Watches. It's like it's going crazy.
Oh, it goes crazy. Yes.
It's like, wait a minute, what? I'm like, my wife? Is it my wife? Is it my wife? I don't know.
All right.
The mics are open.
I think we're there.
The shot is up, as Holly has just mentioned. I keep forgetting that I have to use, don't use a mouse. We got like 3-4 computers going on at the same time. So I guess we're up and
there.
running. All right. Hey, good evening, everyone. Meteorologist James Zahara here. With me, of course, to my left is Andrew Stusky, part of our weather special that hopefully you enjoyed and might have enlightened you as far as any questions that you may have about what's been going on, not just globally and nationally, but locally as well.
Yeah, a whole lot of loaded information in there, some good stuff. And we covered a whole lot of bases too. So we know there's probably going to be some questions.
Oh, yes.
As always. So we want to kind of take this time to allow you guys to submit your questions, whether it's via the Facebook live stream. I know we also have our digital team covering our YouTube live stream and our text number as well that you can send us a text message.
Yep.
So either of those methods, get the questions in. We'll answer them as best we can.
Yeah, we already had one just before the special actually began, a guy who asked about climate change. You know, the Earth itself is several billion years old, and we must have been going through global warming, ice ages, things like that. And yes, we have. We have been seeing these temperatures extreme. What makes this climate change going on so different is because it's happening at a very rapid rate. Of course, that's been done by fossil fuels. That has been done by the variable gases that we're throwing up in the air that helps to warm the atmosphere and allows these shifts to take place as far as how our weather moves from west to east, where the extremes are when it comes to heat, cold, and certainly the frequency of severe weather that has been going on. But also got to keep in mind too is that the ecosystem itself is not used to this rapid change that has been going on. That's the big difference, and that's why it's making a lot of news of late, and not just in the past couple of years, of course, but the past 10, 20, even 30 years or so, and that's why it's a concern, and we're seeing those effects, those impacts here locally as well.
And I love the fact that you brought up the rate of change too, because while it is somewhat of a cycle, and humans of course are influencing that, the scariest part of it is that rate of change. And how quickly are we going to see that change compound itself and become even greater? That's the biggest unknown.
Right. I mean, because I know there are a lot of people who, and we get this once in a while too, and you probably hear this network news as well when it comes to this change in our weather, this change in our climate. It's like, well, come on. Now, we've only been studying this for the past 50 years, and how can you make a conclusion about that? Well, you got to keep in mind that there has been researchers, like, for example, you go down to Antarctica, and they dig down in that deep layer of ice. You can actually see the layers where we had extreme cold and extreme heat, droughts, you name it, all right there. It's kind of amazing what they do. So we can get an idea about how we can compare what happened back then to what's going on now. And that's why it's making news around here.
Exactly, and it's not something you're going to see at the flip of a switch. This is a gradual shift that becomes more noticeable with time, especially in the last few years, like we talked about in the special, the record flooding on the Mississippi River. We had the two derechos, the one in August of 2020. We had one in December of last year, which is kind of unprecedented. So, slowly but surely you're seeing more and more signs right here in the Quad Cities of that change.
Yeah, it's like, because everyone thinks, well, is it a coincidence? Actually, no, because the data is showing that. And what we've experienced with our own eyes, it's like you can't help but be concerned about, well, is this going to be the new norm? You always start hearing that about with the weather that has been going on, not just here locally, but across the country. Is this being the new norm? And in some cases, it just may be because of our climate that has been changing across the entire globe.
Exactly. And it does get kind of messy. We are aware of the fact that, yes, it can be highly politicized at times.
It can, because science in the past 2-3 years have been challenged. And, this type, when it comes to the atmospheric side of it, of course, that's going to be challenged as well.
Exactly. It's science. It's something, you know, we continue to learn as we go along.
Absolutely.
It's constantly changing. And the best way to describe, you know, our atmosphere is think of it as we're at the bottom of an ocean. And we're trying to figure out what's going up at the top of the ocean with the waves and all
That's
that.
right.
And so it's a very complex subject. But again, we're going to try and sort through all the data, tell you exactly what we know and what we showed you with that special.
And because keep in mind too, I mean, we're seeing trends from the data itself, and that's why we're always concerned about what may be taking place in the future and about, you know, future generations to come as well when it comes to our planet.
Exactly. So I think we got some questions in already.
We got a whole bunch of them just popping up all left and right. Let's do the one that talked about, you know, you did your story about tornadoes and the shift in the tornado alley. Is climate change causing more tornadoes to move through the Midwest? And this is coming from Joe Webster.
Yeah, so that's a great question. So in the story that we brought you tonight, we showed you how the tornado alley, if you will, and we kind of don't like the term alley because it makes it seem like it's a narrow, you know, vertical corridor and nothing else happens outside that alley, like a bowling alley lane, you know? But really what we're seeing is the ingredients needed for tornadoes are shifting a little further eastward. And that's a concern on a couple of ends. One, the reason for that is you're seeing a whole lot more drought in the center part of the country. And boy, is that the case right now. I show you that drought map at least once a week, and you notice really the entire western half of the country is in moderate to severe, even extreme drought.
Right.
So what you're seeing is a shift to the east. That's where the moisture is going. That's where there's less drought. And also a concern too, of course, the further east you go, the more population you have. And that includes us here in the Quad Cities. We're in that zone where we're seeing the number of tornadoes increase. And it includes cities like Memphis, like what we're seeing and what we're tracking right now on radar. Areas to the south in parts of the Tennessee Valley, Mississippi, Louisiana, Alabama. That is, I mean, it doesn't get any more clearer than that than what you've seen gone on to the south of here in the last 3-4 weeks.
Right. I mean, usually when you're dealing with a severe weather outbreak, especially a widespread tornado outbreak, yeah, you'll see that in that particular area of the country maybe once a year, maybe once every 2 years. But to see something like that happen once the past 3 weeks in that location, you know, it's like, wow, what are the chances of that to happen? And that's a real concern about, you know, any future development when it comes to severe weather. And then, of course, and you have to think too, because keep in mind, we're in March. And then everything's going to start shifting, and then you have to worry about not just the frequency, but the intensity of those future storms as well. So that's what, of course, we're making sure we are one step ahead when that does occur around here. Hopefully not. We don't want severe weather around here. But.
Definitely not. Yeah. So it was an interesting study. I encourage you to go check out the map. It really is fascinating to see where these trends are increasing and where they're decreasing. Not to say that, you know, the former tornado alley, if you will, is void of tornadoes. They're still going to see tornadoes there.
Right.
It's just that the frequency or number of tornadoes is increasing further to the east. So it's fascinating stuff.
It really is. Another one has to do with how does this come from Bruce McIntyre? How does climate change affect people's health? I think the first thing that comes to my mind is when it comes to allergies.
Yes.
That's always a big concern. Of course, that has to do with when it comes to you know, the frequency of the rain events that's been going on. But also you have to take the opposite side when it comes to the level of drought that we have been seeing continuously these past 8, 9, 10 years around here.
Yeah, and you brought up the allergy season, which is a great point because, and we've talked about this before, that our fall season, if you will, is getting longer, and our spring season is coming in a little bit later. So you're actually seeing like that extension to allergy season.
Right.
In the fall, it's getting longer.
Right.
So there's an impact. You're also seeing an impact too with the insect population.
Right.
That's getting larger because that fall is staying around a little bit longer. So it impacts your health there too. And farmers, as Morgan talked about, they're seeing impacts with rain, different rain patterns, whether it's flooding or drought.
Right. I mean, a Lone Star tick. I didn't even realize that.
Yeah.
Coming from so far south and now making its way as far north around here. And I believe there are even like other insects that are really a concern for farmers when it comes to whatever they plant, when it comes to corn, soybean, you name it. That's always a big concern too, because, you know, it's all about the, you know, what they export out. And of course, it's all about costs and how much it's going to be able to get in their pocket.
Exactly. So it goes beyond, oh my goodness, I'm just going to feel hot longer and it's going to be a sweltering summer longer. It really has far-reaching effects more than just our comfort, if you will.
Right. And, you know, another thing too is like Linnell mentioned the same thing about air pressure affecting sinuses and migraine headaches. I think when it comes to the frequency of, a change of weather, from, good weather to bad weather, of course, you're going to be seeing that sudden change in pressure.
Right.
And thus, of course, with sinuses and having migraines, that's always a big concern as well. So, yeah.
Absolutely. Good point there.
Let's see, we got a few. Let's see. Anna, do you have one popping up?
Just kind of going through some of the Facebook comments. Let's see if there are anything in here.
Is that right? I'll go with this one real quick. And then this one has to do when it comes to the river of the upper atmosphere. Of course, the jet stream we're talking about.
Yes.
Is that river getting larger or smaller, or has that amount been steady over the past century? I mean, that's a good question. That's kind of a challenging one itself. I would say that at least when it comes to jet stream, and of course, jet stream is that river of air that moves the good weather and bad weather across our country. I think, what we're noticing more than anything is a frequency of these storms that travel along these jets. But also you got to keep in mind too, sometimes we see a stall. We call you're going to hear us give that phrase omega blocks. And omega blocks usually is like a big old stop sign, and we do have to determine where that stop sign is. If it's, if it's more, east of here, everything that's going on west is not going to change. So that's where you have to have the concern of when it comes to rain events that just don't move, and then of course flooding, or the opposite, when you're dealing with a lot of sun and heat and it dries things out pretty quickly. So, that's always a big concern when it comes to weather events across our area. So the jet stream, I wouldn't say is getting larger or smaller. I think it's just that we're seeing a lot more, changeable weather that seems to be caught up in this flow that makes its way across our country.
Yeah, great point. Especially in the summer when you get those droughts, those really extended periods of hot weather.
Yes.
We talk about that big high pressure sitting in the center of the country that just doesn't move.
Yes.
While the rain is east and west of us, and we're just kind of caught in the middle. So that's a good example.
And it makes it very hard for us to actually put together a daily forecast.
Yes.
I mean, it's not hard as far as, well, what you see, it's what we call a persistent forecast.
Yeah.
Or what we like to call, what you see is what you get. And sometimes that can last for a good week, 10 days.
Yes.
And so we try to make our weather presentations as interesting as we can. But boy, it can be a real big challenge when you're stuck in that kind of a block.
It is. We can only talk about the UV forecast and the other things and climatology so many times a week. So it does make it challenging for sure.
You had a question. You said you happened to pop up.
Yeah, that was a great one from Rick. I saw you got that one.
Okay, good.
Our own Josh Lamberty's in here. He was watching the special, so he's got a question here. It looks like he says.
By the way, he was like right there in front watching with popcorn and all that stuff.
I'm not surprised.
Yeah. Sharing the popcorn.
He is a die-hard fan, that is for sure. He says, with the changing weather patterns impacting us in the Midwest, how severely do you expect farmers to be impacted in the years ahead? Will I see any impacts when I go to the grocery store because of these severe weather events? Yeah. When you think about the industry, especially that's impacted the most, farmers, I think, are right at the top of the list.
Oh, no question about that. I mean, it seems like almost any product that's out there right now, you're seeing those prices kind of go up a little bit, and that's always a big concern, when it comes to the corn or anything that's in the fields. I mean, really, that's something that, how is that going to, what does it look like in the future as we go through this year? Is there going to be eventually a time we're going to get some relief from all that? And I'm not really sure if that's going to be the case down the road.
Yeah, it's going to be very interesting to watch. And really, I think of our farmers as kind of our witness number one when it comes to this stuff, because they're the ones, they do this for a living. They have seen these patterns and they know what's changing. For example, the one we talked to, we're seeing these heavier rain events. The fields are getting flooded more. Or on the opposite spectrum, we're dealing with drought. So I always say hats off to farmers. They have the most probably difficult job in the world because they are truly at the mercy of Mother Nature.
Oh, they
with
are.
Their life.
Yeah, I mean, not just with the weather, as we mentioned earlier, of course, with when it comes to the insects that are making their way in our parts of our area. That's always a big concern. So their world is really complex.
Yes,
that's for sure, because of everything they have to keep an eye on and how to plan for that down the road. The obvious thing is, when it comes to a point where they just can't get the corn in the ground, well, next thing they have to do is they have to go to soybean. And sometimes it may be that simple, but sometimes it could be even a little bit more challenging than that.
Or you get a derecho in here that just flattens the whole crop, like
Yes.
we've seen before too. So.
And we, you know, that's another thing that's interesting too, because I've had people ask me about, you know, are we going to be seeing these annual derechos around here? You know, it seems like it's trending that way, but at the same time, there's been studies, and you can maybe question me on this one, is that the line of derechos, the activity of derechos of late is going to, because of the warming of our climate, is actually going to be shifting. Was kind of interesting in parts of the Dakotas, and then trying to make his way in our neck of the woods as well, which is kind of fascinating to see just because of the changes that have been going on the past 10 or 20 years around here.
Yeah, absolutely. And we know that those things, they thrive on heat energy. I mean, that's why you got that strong system in here in August, all that hot, humid air. The one thing, of course, that we struggle with is being able to forecast those things long term. I mean, as you saw that day back in August of 2020, we were literally, what was it, 12 hours out?
Yeah.
And that's when we started to see some of the patterns and the ingredients to come together. Very difficult to forecast any farther than that.
And I think for all of us who's been in this business for a long time, it was just overwhelming to see what was going on in our local area. From our eagle eye cameras that we had, it was like, wow. I mean, especially, I'll never forget, and we showed this to you on our special, what downtown Davenport looked like. I mean, it looked like just dust was flying all over the place. It was like, almost like the downtown was almost on fire, it seemed. And it was mainly because of that derecho that was picking up all that dust and debris and such, and just making it just a havoc out there for anyone who was out and about during that time of that day.
Yeah, I think it was a first for many of us. You know, we're so used to a severe thunderstorm complex coming in. Maybe we get a good, like you say, rush of wind for 5-10 minutes and then it's over.
Right.
This thing just held on for eternity.
It did.
It seemed like.
Except for the past 2 or 3 hours after the event, we were still getting close to hurricane force winds.
It's incredible.
Around here, and it's just unimaginable. And then when you start hearing some data that was talking about that, you know, this is going to be an event that we may start seeing more and more, not just more and more like each year, but more in the future.
Right.
So, which is really, it's hard to really sink your head onto that. So.
Yeah. More data and more studies to come from that. I know some people are working on that, so stay tuned, as we always like to say.
Why do climate models say about the warming that could actually happen in the coming decades? This is from Martin Goldberg. That's a tough question, because, you know, we really don't, you know, sit down and really focus on our research when it comes to the climate side of things. Because keep in mind, climate is done with a collection of data over a given number of years.
Right.
Whereas when we talk about weather, we're talking about, you know, what's happening in our general area, given the pieces that we have to work with to come up with a picture of what's happening now, what's going to happen in the future. So I would say that's just a pretty difficult question to ask. You know, when it comes to what do climate models say about the warming? Well, with the warming is going to eventually come with you know, the frequency of changeable weather that's going to be going on. And we kind of briefly talked about that just in our special, and of course what you talked about earlier. So you're talking about the frequency that is going to be increasing a little bit around the area. And then of course you're talking about you're going to hear more of extremes that are going on when it comes to temperatures, especially like for the West Coast itself. I mean, already they're dealing with you know, exceptional drought, and it's March, which is really hard to explain.
Yeah, and also don't forget too, it's always a common misconception. It's not just the warmth. You can also see those more extreme cold events, which is why we hate, you know, using the term global warming, because that's not always the case. You can still get some extreme cold that is a result of climate change itself. So.
Well, that's true. I mean, because you hear that phrase, global warming.
Right.
There's also, I mean, people are starting to use, like climatologists are using global cooling as their phrase, you know, just because of that. Because some people say, well, it's cold here, but take a look at what's going on around the poles. It's actually much warmer. So how can, or I think it's the other way around. It's, you know, why is it so cold up in Antarctica or in the North Pole, but it's extremely warm around here?
Right.
Do you call that global warming? Do you call that global cooling? You know, if there's one extreme in one place, it's going to be extremely cold in another.
Exactly. And Mother Nature's just trying to balance all of that out.
Which is not easy.
No.
And that's why, once again, I can't stress enough, that's why it has been such a challenge for the ecosystem itself.
Right.
Because, you know, in the past, it took hundreds and thousands of years for the ecosystem to adapt to that change. But here we're talking about just a few hundred years or so.
Yeah, the time scale is
Maybe
shorter.
a lot, but that's extremely short.
Yeah.
And that's why you're hearing the concerns about, like with polar bears up north and such. You know, they can't find the food. The migration of fish and whales, and we can go on and on and on. You know, when it comes to certain mammals and such, it's just phenomenal when you hear this kind of thing that's going on across our country and across the whole world, I should say.
Far, wide-reaching impacts.
Yeah. You want to try and answer a question?
Let's see. I think there's a couple more that came in. Let's see.
I think I could. Let's see. I think I could try and answer this one.
Yeah, go ahead.
Rich Hendrickson, are river levels impacted more by farmers putting in a lot more drain tile? And is less farm ground getting replaced by concrete and development? You know, and that would probably have to come from a farmer itself. My thing is, when it comes to these river levels, and there's a study that was done, and I was going to put it in my story, but it was just getting a little too long.
There's a lot of good information.
But you have to talk about, okay, the floodplains that are going on, that we know, that people know actually, who live near, let's say, the Mississippi River, or even the Rock River itself, because they see that in their flood insurance, the cost of such a going
Oh, yeah,
up.
yeah.
And we have actually, my mother-in-law actually has a place in Coal Valley where she's one house away from the current floodplain. And indications are next 15 years or so, that floodplain is going to expand, just given the data that we see.
Okay, yeah.
And some people may know that already in, let's say, for example, in Coal Valley. But there are other places, other towns that live along the river that may not know about that you're going to eventually see, you know, any flood insurance that they do have increase even more.
That makes sense.
So, Rich, I apologize. I mean, I think that's more of a farmer's question than anything when it comes to that.
And you even touched on that in your story too, and because it's not just about the landscape, but you were talking about how, you know, a warmer atmosphere holds more water.
Yes.
And that means heavier rainfall rates and heavier amounts, and that has a big thing to play with it too.
Right. Yeah.
And seeing more of that.
You want to give a crack at?
Let's see. Bill says, I've heard quite a while that eventually we're going to have Florida-like weather, kind of in the Quad Cities. Any truth to that?
I think maybe be talking about temperatures. Let's put it that way.
Temperatures, yeah, and that's again something that I don't even think I would see in my lifetime. It probably maybe take 2 more lifetimes to see a change like that. But you're already starting to slowly see that. I mean, the fall season getting longer. How long do we have to wait usually, especially in the last 5-10 years, to get a decent snow in here in the winter time?
I know, no kidding.
Have you noticed it's coming later and later? You're having to wait till January.
Which is a bummer because you like to see a little snow on Christmas Day. But that has been the trend of late. And I think that may be the new normal around here. But we'll see. I mean, here's the thing too, because you know we were supposed to be in this La Nina and get a good amount of snow.
Yes.
And here we only had like 20 inches of snow this season, where we're kind of projecting. In most cases, in La Ninas, it doesn't happen all the time, but La Ninas usually give us more snow around.
They do, yeah.
Over 36 inches, that's usually our norm around here, but not the case. No. Once again, it's an inexact science, right?
Yes. I mean, you can try to look at past years like we've done and say, you know what, past La Ninas have said more snow, which was kind of, you know, the forecast going into this winter. But wouldn't you know it, the jet stream, you know, further east, that's where the trough was, that dive in the jet stream, and that's where all the storms were this winter.
Kind of crazy.
Meanwhile, we're cold. We're shivering. We're freezing.
We want some spring weather. Well, folks, I found out from Holly upstairs saying that we're just about ready to finish this. We'll go ahead and kind of end our question and answer, and we apologize for anyone that we weren't able to get you know, your question answered. There's so many of them, and we appreciate it. We hope that you really enjoyed the special. Boy, it was so fun. We may just try and do this again.
Yeah, why not?
But we are going to show it again. We'll have it on our webpage, and also we'll have it. We'll actually show it again, the special itself, on Memorial Day itself.
Oh, sweet. Yeah. Excellent.
So thank you, everyone, for part of our Facebook Live. Of course, no severe weather that we expect to see tonight, and hopefully not for a while around here. But, of course, you can always count on us for any changeable weather right here at WQAD News 8. Thank you very much for being part of us, and you have a great evening.
Thanks, guys.